My responsibility is to talk about the discipling movement, a threat to evangelism. When one studies the New Testament, he finds a church that is militantly evangelistic. Especially is one impressed when he studies the missionary journeys as revealed in the book of Acts. The second missionary journey, Paul had come to Thessalonica, and there he opened and alleged that Christ's needs have suffered and been raised again. In Acts chapter 18, verse 4 at Corinth, he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Gentiles. This is only a taste of the kind of activity that was taking place in New Testament times in regards to evangelism. Secondly, that church marched as a mighty army, proclaiming the truth of Christianity and refuting error wherever it was found. Thirdly, the New Testament church was a church that was spoken against, not so much because of the way the gospel was preached, but because of the distinctive message that was preached. And so it was said that those that have turned the world upside down are come hither also. Or we know that it is everywhere spoken against. And fourthly, the New Testament church was a church that condemned division everywhere, even within her own ranks, knowing that such division weakened her efforts. One studies the book of 1 Corinthians, he is impressed with the Apostle Paul's writings on the subject for the need of being united, so that the gospel of Jesus Christ will go forth. Now, in presenting the material that we do at this particular hour, we are not in any way contradicting any one of these four observations which we have mentioned. What we're going to do is to address ourselves to abuses, misuses, false teaching, and false practice. We're not opposed to the New Testament teaching of total commitment, only as total commitment is defined by this movement. We certainly aren't opposed to soul winning, only as it is described, defined, promoted, and enforced by this movement. Oftentimes when one speaks on this subject, he is accused of not being interested in taking the gospel to the lost and building up the saved. And nothing can be farther from the truth. I believe it would do us well to go back over, at least briefly, a history of this movement. Contrary to the thinking of many brethren, the discipling movement did not begin among churches of Christ. Is it necessary for me to tell you that it is not the concept of discipleship which is taught and practiced by the New Testament church? It is a human system of indoctrination and control conceived and promoted by human beings. It was back in the year 1963 that Robert Coleman presented his book, The Master Plan of Evangelism. And this movement, by the presentation of that book, gained nationwide attendance. 1963. Doesn't seem like it's been that long ago that we were first presented with this problem in the church, and it really wasn't that long ago. It was some years later that it began to invade the church based upon the teachings which are found in this book. The Master Plan of Evangelism, as I would try to describe it, says basically that Jesus dominated and controlled the lives of the 12 apostles, and later taught them to control the lives of others so that they would be able to control the lives of others on down the line. Soon this idea began to invade churches of Christ as it did the denominational world. Now I want you to know that the denominational world has been as problem with this as have churches of Christ in the past. I tried this lesson out last evening. I don't know whether you ever try your lessons out before you present them here or not. But in the audience was a school teacher in the Springfield system, and she said that student teachers would come from one of the Baptist colleges there in Springfield and would reveal to her confidentially how they were involved in this system themselves. And so it is. I want to impress again that it is not a movement which began in churches of Christ. It went far and wide throughout the religious world. But it is to be remembered that it is a human system of selection and supervision. Now, those two words have not been chosen casually. Selection and supervision are two chapter headings in Coleman's book, The Master Plan of Evangelism, where a Christian is selected to be made into a strong disciple by a person who refers to themselves as a discipler. And all of this is totally unknown to the New Testament. There were a few congregations around the brotherhood that took up the plan. Foremost among them was the congregation in Gainesville, Florida, under the leadership of Chuck Lucas. This movement, which began outside of the church, quickly spread across the brotherhood as campus evangelists and others who had been trained there made their way throughout the brotherhood. At that particular point in time, it was primarily limited to college and university campuses and towns and cities. But it soon went beyond those state colleges and university campuses to engulf many congregations. And it spread like wildfire, not only in this nation, but especially in the missions fields. And at that time, it paraded itself as a mere method of evangelism and a means of maturing Christians. We were introduced to it very early on and were forced to make a study of it, and as a result of that study, I wrote the book, The Discipling Movement Among Churches of Christ. It was widely circulated. And when I would discuss the matter with people back in those early days, the reply always was, it seemed to me, well, you must remember that it's just a method of evangelism among many methods of evangelism, and that it is a means of maturing Christians. Why would you be opposed to something like this? Its insidious nature wasn't realized until it was too late. And the cause of Christ suffered a great deal as a result of it. Perhaps the more famous convert of the movement was Kip McKean, who was converted by Chuck Lucas at Gainesville and moved to Boston, Massachusetts. Upon arrival there, McKean cleaned out the church, I guess is the way to say it. He expelled the former original elders and replaced them with men of his own choosing so he could begin his discipling program there. It has continued to grow from that day until now, until on October the 15th, 1993, it was revealed that they had 40,000 members. It has become so identified with the discipleship movement that it is now known as the Boston Movement, or as the International Church of Christ. John Stossel of ABC did an expose of the movement which aired on 2020 on October the 15th, 1993. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many have seen that expose? Well, that's a goodly number. Briefly, in this expose, he interviewed former members, and in it is revealed that they now lose 2 out of every 3 of their members. He also, secondly, interviewed a former member who, along with his wife, were in the process of counseling members who are leaving, and so that presents a tremendous task if they're losing 2 out of every 3. And thirdly, he interviewed Al Baird, an elder there, seems to be the leading elder and spokesman, because Kip McKean refused to be interviewed. There are several things that were brought out in this interview, and I wish we had time to see the whole thing. But we're going to limit ourselves to his interview of former members. Remember, my responsibility is to point out that the discipling movement is a threat to evangelism. And I want you to see in the interviews with these former members, at least one threat of the discipling movement to evangelism around the world. The movement claims its method of discipling is the New Testament method. Coleman in his book says, "This is the Master's method, and nothing else will ever suffice." And to show just how strongly they believe in it, they believe that they are the restoration movement, for they feel that this matter in which they're involved is part and parcel of New Testament Christianity, and it hasn't been done yet. So they feel that they are the restoration movement. But it is merely a human system, a pyramid scheme. As you and I know, it is practiced in the business world, but it's been brought out of the business world into the religious world. And Coleman's book, The Master Plan of Evangelism, became the blueprint for the scheme. They base their notions on three main arguments, the first of which is Matthew 28, 19 and 20, where the New Testament teaches that we're to make disciples of all nations. But they believe that you are to disciple Christians. And there's a vast deal of difference between that and what is taught in the Great Commission. Coleman and all the disciples since him have attempted to show that that system is built upon the relationship that existed between Christ and the apostles. That Christ chose the apostles, that He selected them, and that He dominated their lives. And then they in turn selected others and dominated their lives, so that they could select others and dominate their lives, and we could say that as many times as necessary to get it down to us. We're also told in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, that there is the pattern for the discipling movement, but it does not fit their scheme. Paul told Timothy to select faithful men and give unto them the things that he had been taught, so that they would be able to teach others also. Now their scheme says they're to select weaker people in order to make them strong. The Bible says you take men who are strong and you commit to them the Word of God. And so every passage that is used and every argument that is used is taken out of its context and made to say something that inspiration did not intend to say. The discipling scheme is foreign to the New Testament, and it requires brainwashing of all who are received. You see, it takes a discipler who chooses a Christian to make out of that person a disciple. Do you notice that we have used the word disciple and the word Christian differently? The New Testament doesn't do that, but this system does. A Christian is weaker, a disciple is something far superior. Now this discipler that I may have is someone who has been discipled by someone else, who has been discipled by someone else, who has been discipled by someone else until you get to the top of the pyramid. For it is a pyramid scheme. And the person who is at the top of that pyramid is the one who has introduced the discipling scheme to that congregation. However, the Boston movement has gone far beyond that now. At the head of the pyramid is Kip McKean. And not only has he been responsible for discipling all of those people, but they are in the process of establishing congregations around the world, and he's in charge of them as well. Does that sound something to you like Roman Catholicism and its Pope? Disciples and disciplers read and study books and tapes and speeches and other materials produced by the organization. I want to suggest to you, if they would take their New Testaments and read and study them alone without those helps, they would never find their scheme there. Why did faithful preachers of the gospel preach for years and years in this country and around the nation and never discover that? One reason: it ain't there. It's a system of control and government which is unknown to the New Testament. And this is put in the plainest terms by Dr. Keith Phillips in his book, The Making of a Disciple. This is what he says, quote, "Tell your potential disciple why he must submit to you as the one whom God has invested authority to train him for reproduction. His submission is crucial because without it you cannot exercise authority over him," unquote. Now, this particular point has been denied through the years by those who have been involved in the movement. But it is the crucial part of the movement. The control of a discipler over a disciple. The discipling movement brings mental anguish to many who participate in it. Is it necessary for me to remind you of what we just saw? People entertaining the notion of committing suicide. People who committed suicide. One of the things I was unprepared for after printing the booklet, The Discipling Movement Among Churches of Christ, was the number of phone calls I would receive throughout the week from distraught mothers and fathers around the nation whose sons and daughters had been caught up in this cult. I really had no answer except prayer and attempt to teach them what the New Testament has to say. But the problem with that is that those people have closed minds, and it's almost impossible to talk to them at all. Now, the dangers of this movement to evangelism by the Lord's church. I think undoubtedly we saw one of those dangers as we looked at this expose by 2020. Losing 2 out of every 3 members. Most of them, at least many of them, distraught, upset psychologically, and people saying simply, "My faith has been destroyed." Let me ask you. You say, "I'm a member of the Church of Christ, and I've come to teach you the way of salvation." How receptive are former members going to be? A second danger we face is that the discipling movement is already established in many major cities around the world. And if they are not yet established in those cities, they have plans to establish congregations in those cities. And we must impress upon you and upon others that these people are not the Lord's church. They are a cult. And that I have received reports they continue to fall away as far as teaching of the New Testament is concerned. For example, in matters of worship. They no longer pay attention to the teaching of the New Testament in this regard, using instruments of music on occasion and observing the Lord's Supper on other days other than the Lord's Day. The job of evangelism is not an easy one. But I want to suggest to you that a movement that started out being evangelistic in nature turned into a cult very quickly, and makes our job of winning souls for Christ wherever they're established much more difficult. For those who are members of it have their ears closed, and they will not listen to you as you attempt to teach them the truth. A second great problem in connection with evangelism. As you can see, these people continue to attract large numbers. We don't hear much about them here anymore. They've withdrawn themselves, and they're going their way primarily. And so somebody says, well, you don't fuss with success. How do you define success? Someone says, well, it's large numbers. And far too many people are impressed with large numbers and equate those large numbers with the Lord's blessings. But let me tell you something, that has never been so. You think about it in the days of Noah. I've read about a congregation of Pentecostals in Korea that numbers 30,000. Just because they have 30,000 people there and are successful in the eyes of the world, does that mean they have the Lord's blessing? At the turn of the century, the digressives took with them the large number of our members, much larger than we. Does that mean they took also with them the Lord's blessing? Let me suggest to you again that men are not saved by a human scheme. Men are saved when they hear and obey the gospel. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. But because the theme of this lectureship is evangelism, I want to end on this very positive note. For us to look up, lift up our eyes to the harvest. For truly, it is plentiful.